Okay, so I want to dive into the FDR and LBJ revisionism, and borderline fetishism. I keep hearing how if FDR or LBJ were in charge, they would be politically jujutsuing their way into getting the majority votes needed to pass this or that progressive policy. There's just one problem with this: we don't really know this, because, during their entire administrations, they had constant supermajorities. In some instances, they had seriously padded supermajorities. We're talking 80% of the Senate, the equivalent of 80 Senate seats today. So even if Republicans unanimously opposed progressive legislation, as they do today, and with the existence of a couple of centrist Democrats, as we have today, it wouldn't matter, because there were still enough Democrats to ram these bills across. During these administrations, in their most vulnerable moments, where the Democrats had the least sizable majority, they still had roughly 60% of the Senate. That's right. Their low point was still a near supermajority. That's roughly the equivalent of those 4 or 5 months when Obama had his alleged supermajority, which was only such if you included Joe Lieberman. Joe Lieberman, who was an independent, and who had endorsed John McCain over Barack Obama. He's the one who joined the GOP in threatening to filibuster the ACA, were the Democrats to include a public option.
Finally, we have less than a minute left. The House passed health care. What do you think of the bill they passed? And do you still intend, if there is a public option and if there's this tax on so-called Cadillac health plans, will you support a Republican filibuster on final passage in the Senate?
Well, there's some good things in the House passed plan. You know, I think we ought to do health care reform this year to deal with the two great problems that President Obama and others have talked about. There are unsustainable, continuing increases in the cost of health care. We've got to stop that. And there are millions of Americans who don't have health insurance. But I'm afraid that our colleagues in the House added a lot onto that subtract from the genuine purposes of health care reform. And one was to create a public option plan. The public option plan is unnecessary. It has been put forward, I'm convinced, by people who really want the government to take over all of health insurance. They got a right to do that. I think that would be wrong. But worse than that, we have a problem even greater than the health insurance problems, and that is a debt. $12 trillion today, projected to be $21 trillion in 10 years.
So at this point, I take it you're a no vote in the Senate.
If the public option plan is in there, as a matter of conscience, I will not allow this bill to come to a final vote, because I believe the debt can break America and send us into a recession that's worse than the one we're fighting our way out of today. I don't want to do that to our children and grandchildren.
Senator Lieberman, thank you.
So, it was either pass the bill without a public option during this small window of time, or pass nothing, and forego extending health insurance to an additional 20 million Americans. Oh, and that story about LBJ pressuring his senators to get in line. This was to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This was before the Southern Switch. In other words, when it was the Democratic Party who were the ones pandering to racists, or were racist themselves, or whatever. So yes, passing this bill was a lot different, given that the GOP, being the less racist pandering party at the time, wasn't being obstructionist. In fact, a higher percentage of Republicans voted for the bill. I bring this to you because certain progressive channels continually provide a false sense of political history, and this creates a certain sense of self-destructive cynicism among the left. And in the end, this just helps the GOP and helps ensure that more ambitious proposals will never be realized. So then, what does history tell us? That the time when ambitious progressive proposals were enacted was a time when the Democrats had supermajorities, sometimes with an insanely comfortable margin. This is what facts and history tell us. Here is the vote breakdown for Medicare in 1965. As you can see, the vast majority of Senate Democrats voted for it, with a handful voting nay or abstaining. This is a similar spread to what we see with Democrats now, and if anything, these ratios were probably worse than what we'd see if they were to vote on Medicare for all today. I think we'd actually see a higher percentage of yay votes from today's Democrats. The difference being that Democrats today have 50 Senate seats, not the 68 they had when they voted on Medicare. The GOP's composition, however, is different. You can see that 40% of Senate Republicans voted for Medicare in 1965. No Republican today would vote for Medicare for all, and they would obviously filibuster the bill into oblivion. Compare this to modern bills, where you have a similar spread among the Democrats, oftentimes with even fewer holdouts. It's the GOP who is now unified in opposition to progressive policies. So let's recap. Ambitious policies like these were possible, due to Democratic supermajorities. Not because FDR and LBJ were high-level, superhero, ultra-ninja, FBI hostage-level negotiators. Not because a pack of new House representatives gambled with the speakership process and 2 Senate runoff races that would determine whether or not the Democrats would achieve a simple majority, all for a vote that had no chance of passing, all for some hashtag fantasy. Not because some little imp was constantly telling his followers to harass a young House representative on Twitter over his fantasy version of reality. It happened because of Democratic supermajorities. So, when it comes to the possibility of enacting progressive legislation, we can either use facts, logic, and history, which tells us that we need Democratic supermajorities, the more progressive the better. And we can note that a growing squad gets us there. Or we can listen to petty, self-serving podcasters who drone on about third parties, and who are engaged in an ongoing smear campaign against a growing squad, a squad that is coincidentally rendering said podcasters' third-party wet dreams obsolete. To quote the late Gore Vidal, "We live in the United States of amnesia."